it's springtime in the Southern Hemisphere and the gardens have just exploded into spring bling. We've got tulip time. Every second public space is full of tulips and blossoms, and it's just absolutely glorious. Hi, Saj.
Hi, Fleur. How are you doing? It absolutely is gorgeous at the moment. We have the flowers doing their thing. It is the perfect spring bling. That's the way to describe it, spring bling.
Yeah, and you know what? I think everyone gets mesmerised by it because we've come out of this sort of drab winter and all this colour hits you and everyone's just taking photos and loving all this colour. But what we want to talk to you about today is what happens when the colour goes.
When it all goes, because it
about
is short-lived.
3 weeks.
Yeah, that's right. So flowers or foliage, finding the balance in garden design.
Getting this balance is so important from a garden design perspective, and this is where it's really easy to get taken up with these one-hit wonders.
Yeah, exactly. They are one-hit wonders.
Yeah.
Think about Video Killed the Radio Star. For those of you who are the same generation as us, it's the same for a tulip.
So I just want to welcome all our listeners today. So welcome to the On Garden Design podcast with longtime friends Fleur and Sachi, where we're chatting about gardens and what makes a garden great, and we try to inspire you and make designing accessible to anyone who's interested in gardens. So you can find us on Facebook and Insta and follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts so you know when the next episode's available.
So we're going to get right into it today. So we've already talked a bit about why we are talking about flowers or foliage, but I guess the key thing is what's in this.
And the why is because it's very easy to get mesmerised by pretty things.
That's right. And we had a great weekend just it sounds like we travel there every weekend if you've been listening to these podcasts more regularly, but we often go to the Southern Highlands for a girls' weekend with old school friends, and we chose this one specifically. And sorry, for those of you who are not in Canberra or around us, the Southern Highlands is in New South Wales in Australia, and they do a spectacular spring. They are a great climate for bulbs and things, and they have amazing gardens. So we timed it just to go up there. And so we had the mass tulips, the mass daffodils, the things that make spring spring. So we did a lot of thinking about, well, what does it look like when all of that stuff's gone? What's left?
Yeah. And this is where, because, we are a garden design podcast. We aren't just about the one-time bling pretties in the garden, but we're about helping you think through those design elements that just will carry your garden through every season. So when you open those curtains in winter, you're still satisfied.
What we're really asking you, and I have to throw this in because, it's one of those things that I just listened to and I went, well, it's a bit, hoity-toity, isn't it? We're talking about the fourth dimension of time in your garden. Really, that's what this is about, because you do want your garden to be, well, you don't necessarily, as Fleur said, you might want to make a decision that I'm going to throw my all into spring, or I'm going to throw my all into the summer flowers. But make that decision consciously and know that when you do, you're potentially trading off for other seasons.
Yeah. And actually what's really interesting, because I'm an avid attender at the Open Gardens Canberra scheme. I love going into other people's gardens and pottering around.
You're just nosy, basically.
I'm nosy. And it's a free ticket to be nosy. And the lovely thing is that it's a connection. You get a sense of the pulse of community because you hear other conversations, you're hearing what other people are loving. And most of these gardens aren't designer gardens. They're just
home gardens.
Gardeners. Yeah. And so you get a sense of what kind of works and what doesn't. And one thing I've found really intriguing over the years I've been observing the gardens is that they clearly the organisers pick gardens for the season of which they really have high impact.
Yeah.
And one I went to the other day and it was all about the blossoms and the bulbs, and I walked around thinking, what happens for the other 48 weeks of the year?
Yeah.
And so it's just a really great seed to sow in our listeners' minds when you're thinking about putting that
exactly
putting that together to get some interest across those seasons, across thinking of your garden as a dynamic, changing space that you want to get joy from throughout the
365 days of the year. So let's have a bit of a conversation about, if you don't have a flower, what else is there that provides some structure and interest in your garden when there is no flower?
Yeah. Well, if there's no flower, you're looking at other things like foliage colour. You're looking at shape and form. So plants are just one of the aspects.
Yes, of course.
And, we talked a bit about this in Structuring Your Winter Garden episode, and it's just about looking at, bark can be a really beautiful sculptural piece in your garden in winter. And then
even in spring.
Oh,
if I could just
yes.
interrupt, sorry,
Yes.
because I just took a photo the other day. I have some crepe myrtles in my garden. They have a lovely bark. It's sort of a bit pinkish. And I, at the moment, have a whole bunch of bulbs coming up under the very naked, stark crepe myrtles. And actually the contrast is really nice too, even though I do have some of my spring bling going on.
Yeah. But this is where I think it's getting that balance with the foliage and flowers, where if you've got those tulips coming up under your crepe myrtle, so those tulips or those bulbs, they're having their time in that place, but you haven't dedicated a garden bed to them.
Yes, that's right.
So when they die down, you've got other shrubs around in that garden bed that are coming up and having their moment. And so there's this morphing and dynamic
that's right.
growth.
And if you're thinking about it in terms of, very simply, if you're out in your garden, what you're looking at that time, at the moment you're looking at the bulbs, but actually when they die down, you'll be looking at the crepe myrtle.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I'm getting some benefit out of my crepe myrtle, even though it's wintry.
Yes, that's right. We want plants that perform a number of functions for us.
And in fact, isn't there, because I was just reading something about this, isn't there a one of those rules that we've been talking about recently around you need to have a certain number of plants where at least you're getting the foliage aspect of, like there's an 80%, 20% or something like that. I can't remember what the proportion is, where people say that's kind of a golden rule almost of garden design.
Yeah, I have actually thought of some questions. My third question first, because it comes straight from what you were just saying. And the third question is, what is my balance between foliage and flowers? So here we are talking about not structures or not hardscaping or not anything. It's just foliage interest and flowers. And my answer to that, for those of you who love rules, was minimum 80%. So minimum 80% foliage and 20%
year
flowers.
Round. You're talking about?
Year round.
Yeah.
Yep.
So evergreen.
Yes. And that is because those elements of the evergreen hold the garden together. And when we talk about evergreen, we're talking also including things like lawn.
Yes, of course.
Lawn is an evergreen.
Well, provided you don't have the Sir Walter Buffalo lawn, which goes brown in winter, because it's not going to help you then. So we're talking about the year-round green lawn.
Yes. Yes. Well, then again, we have talked in the past about not all foliage is green.
True.
So
but I'm not sure brown. I think we're stretching it there.
No one wants to look at a brown lawn, do they?
No.
So even
it
in
looks
this
parched.
fad of meadow-style naturalistic planting, we don't actually want to see a dead lawn.
No. Particularly because it's a monoculture, and often it doesn't have interesting dried seed heads or movement that a grass might have, otherwise. So I think we can safely assume that no one's looking for the dead lawn look. But I was going to say this weekend, I think one of the best descriptions of what you're talking about now that I saw combined both the evergreen with bulbs, but also how they use the evergreen too is important. So I'll describe what we saw. We basically were in, the garden we went to see was Harper's Mansion in Berrima. It's a very old garden. But there was this one really neat bit where they had clipped box hedge or buxus ball spheres, and they were surrounded by bulbs. So there was always that really clear structure there. They were dense, tightly clipped balls. So they stood out as well, and then they were surrounded by the bulbs. It was a really neat way of keeping that year-round something there, because the bulbs were already on their way out.
Yes, and actually that's a great example to keep extrapolating from, because in that same garden bed where the bulbs were having their last moments, you could see the beginnings of the hydrangeas developing their leaves, and you've also got the hellebores were still flowering.
Yes.
So you've got this sort of longevity of some plants, the hellebores that have come through winter and into spring, and they'll finish soon. But then the hydrangeas, which will bush up and take over and hang over where all the bulbs were, will have their moment. And so it's this evolving, it's almost like, I think of it like a symphony.
Yeah, that's right. And I was going to say you could almost make an art from sort of designing with those transitions in mind. If you know that, you know, the hellebores are slightly longer lived than the bulbs, they will transition then, and then you'd have a, you know, a hydrangea that will come on just as the hellebores were transitioning out. You could make a complete art out of this if you were very OCD, I think.
Well, I mean, I think that's where some of the amazing designers in our industry do go to that sort of end. They actually apply a lot of science to their planting plans where... and I know when I go to the Australian Landscape Conference that hosted by Fleur Flannery, she always invites this wonderful Japanese speaker, Midori, I can't remember her full name, and she talks about this millennial garden in Japan, and it is absolutely striking when you see pictures, and she gives you pictures on each month, so 12 months in the year, and it's hard to believe it's the same garden because she's applied this science. She's a botanist, I think, by her background, and there's this evolving plant palette, and it's absolutely stark from one season to the next. It's the same garden, but it's beautifully evolving, and that's where that dimension of time is so well done, and it's done in a scientific way, but it looks so beautiful and artistic.
But we're realists, and I certainly won't be going to those lengths. So what else can we be thinking about when we're thinking about this?
Can I ask my second question?
Yes, maybe you can.
Okay. So when I'm looking at my garden, and when you're looking at your garden, you can ask your garden, what is the balance between static and seasonal planting?
And so you're still just talking about plants, because static could also be the hardscapes. Or the sculptures or the fountains.
Don't get ahead of me.
Oh, sorry. Back in my box.
That's right. And so the static planting, those things that really don't change, like your hedges.
Yes.
And you know, I suppose some of the things like your cycads.
Yes.
Things that are
if
really
you've got topiary, it might also be
that. Topiary, that's right. I love the topiary.
Yes.
And so that's where I would put. This is where you're really getting into the sort of, once again, about 80% you want static, and the seasonal planting. See, they're things like, they will last a long time. So think of your deciduous viburnums.
Yes.
So they're all, you know, leafing up now, and then the display, it lasts for a long time. It's not like a daffodil. There's a lot of show there, and then the foliage effect, and maples, you know, you've got this wonderful, that's what I'm talking about, seasonal planting as opposed to flowers.
Yes.
So that's where with the first question I'd say minimum 80% of foliage to flowers, whereas in this one here it's about 80%.
Yes.
So, that's probably the first question. You're probably better off saying 90%, I think.
Oh, really?
90-10. Because flowers, you know, if you're just planting something for flowers.
Yes,
they're short-lived.
So really, there's almost like a rule in here as well, or, you know, guidance. Depends on what you know. I'm a guidance, Fleur's a rules. So really, you want to be thinking about each plant, and we're specifically talking about plants here. So if you can get two elements out of a plant throughout your year, so they might have flowers and be an evergreen, or they might have amazing bark and have flowers, you know, and the rest of the year they're just leaves. So you want something that's almost like of interest at more than one. So when we're talking about those evergreens, it's not necessarily just evergreens, it's that interest piece. Whereas things like bulbs, you really don't plant bulbs for their foliage.
No.
So they are just about the flower. A lot of plants will have, and I'm thinking about my camellias now, because they have that beautiful glossy green, evergreen structural foliage the entire year, and then they'll have flowers as well. And they'll have flowers at a time that often not a lot of else is flowering. Ditto with the maples, as Fleur was just talking about then. You get a couple of things out of it. You get the lovely leaves, but then you also get fabulous autumn colour.
Yes.
As well.
Yes. And for our listeners, if you stay tuned as we move on through the podcast, we're going to give you some specific examples of plants that have multiple functions throughout the season. The ones we call
multi-function units. That's the photocopiers.
How about multi-season givers?
Yeah, good.
There you go.
Like that.
So
that can go with the one-hit wonders.
That's right.
We have to come up with snappy names for these different types of plants.
Just rolling them out.
We are.
So now I'm going to get you to ask the third question to your garden. And this is where I actually would have started, but we went in reverse order. That's okay.
That's because I mustered up for everyone.
Oh, it's because I'm flexible, you know.
You don't follow the rules? Had to throw that one in.
That's right. No, this has really, really made me twitch. But okay. So the third question is, what is my balance of hardscaping to planting? Right. So now we've talked flowers, we've moved into seasonal static plantings. Now we're looking at plants as a group against the hardscape. You need hardscaping.
Yes.
You need a balance. However, when you often see this with, I'd have to say, some landscapers and magazines that promote kind of on-trend landscaping focuses a lot on hardscape. So often you see these really hardscaped areas with very minimal planting. And to me, they always feel unbalanced.
See, I quite like them.
Is it a minimalist thing?
It is. It's a minimalist thing, absolutely.
And it might be a style choice where contemporary and modern style plays very much into the textures and patinas and
the contrast
of hardscape materials.
That's right.
So materials very much versus planting.
It is. But I'd just like to also point out it's really good because it's usually pretty low maintenance if you're not a gardener.
That's true. You just need to buy yourself a blower. and an electric one because it's much better.
Yes, of course, of course.
Yes. So anyway, I want to give a little bit of a formula for those people who like rules and guidelines. Some of us really like numbers. So if you are quite mathematical about this, a good conversation I had with a very talented garden designer, he offered that no less than 1/3 of plants. So if you've got 2/3 hardscaping or 2/3 kind of, I guess, open space scaping and 1/3 plant, any less than that space feels mean. Yeah. And that's the words he used. He said, it feels mean.
Isn't that interesting?
And I get that. Yes. I can feel that. And often this is, I always refer to that great Aussie backyard that we have described in many of our episodes, where you do have this sense of just grass and fence. And it feels mean. And sometimes people put these little islands of garden beds.
Pots.
A garden bed right in the middle of the grass.
Yeah.
And it looks mean.
That does.
And it just doesn't belong. And it's poorly weighted
But there's so many other things that are going wrong there in terms of your design principles. It's not necessarily that you've got the proportions wrong in terms of the 1/3, 2/3. Because I think there are also, and I have in my head at the moment, quite a utilitarian sort of white concrete area which might have one very sculptural tree with, maybe only a few succulents that are quite architectural at the bottom. I really like that kind of a look, and I would say it would be more like, 1/10, 9/10 than it would be 1/3 and 2/3. But I think and I guess this goes back to what we were talking about before. You've got to work out what you want for your garden and what works for you, but do it cognizantly and think about how you're designing it. Because if you're someone who, like me, doesn't mind having quite a bit of hardscape versus your soft, then that might be the right thing. As long as you get your balance and your unity and all of the other design principles right. It's subjective, all of this.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think if you're going to go that minimalist or contemporary garden style, you need to choose the plants that punch well above their weight. So you have to have a strong evergreen architectural form.
Yes.
Whereas you can't really have a cottagey kind of plants that will only last for a couple of months.
Yes, that's right. They've got to be there all the time. They've got to be very strong. They've got to really hold their own in amongst all that hardscaping. Yeah. Very true.
And it's very likely that if you choose that style of garden, that you want the garden to be quite low maintenance.
Yes.
And you want it to be, your focus on that hardscaping is because that's what you entertain or you do that. And so it really is a personal preference, and those sort of gardens are highly static, but that might be what works for you.
That's absolutely right. If you just like having a blower instead of a lawnmower. Something like that.
Well, that's good. So let's move on then and have a look at some examples of how we can actually do this, as in how do we get a better balance of foliage and flowers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we did promise you that we would talk about some of the specifics.
Individual plants, that's right. And I guess one of the things that we both really liked, again at Harper's Mansion when we were away on the weekend, was Snow in Summer, which is a ground cover, Ceriastrum. Is that right?
Cerastium
Cerastium.
tomentosum.
I always get that wrong. In fact, I get every Latin name wrong, so you can just assume that Fleur's got it right.
Well, only because I did Latin until year 12.
That helps.
And now I'm redoing it again because my 14-year-old's doing Latin.
Well, there you go. There you go. So they had snow in summer, which is a whole lot easier to remember, which is a very low growing ground cover and a bit blue-grey. And they had iris bulbs coming up through it. So it was a really nice, they were going to flower at different times. You had the foliage there the whole time. When the irises were done, you still had something left. It was a really nice little description of what we're trying to get at.
Yes, and that's where the layering is the answer to the one-hit wonders. So you can still have your one-hit wonders in there, but you've got these other layers that are holding it together and providing a longer seasonal impact. And I think the point is, though, you should never design a garden based on a particular tree or plant, but you look at where do I want my high-impact areas to be, and what is that tree going to give me after its 2 weeks of blossoms. And so this is where we want to also get into that conversation about this multiple season givers.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So if you've got something that has beautiful blossoms, so we're talking about, say, the forsythia, it's beautiful and striking and amazing for a couple of weeks, but after that it's a really boring shrub.
It is a very boring, and it becomes a background plant basically, and then in winter it's a nothing. So it's a deciduous as well.
Yeah. So, so if it's something like that, if it's a bit of a background plant, then you want to make sure you've got other seasonal interests coming up in front of it. So in the winter, it's just hides somehow.
That's right. Or maybe you've got, there's an evergreen behind it. So it comes up in between some evergreens, or you have, another perennial that comes out at a different time and is more spectacular at a different time after forsythia's been flowering. So you're actually back to that layering. You want to be thinking about that layering. You want to be thinking about the time element around how your plants are sequencing their, feature, whenever that might be.
And actually, I want to throw one in there for bulbs, because we've talked a lot about spring bulbs, but one bulb that I always put into garden beds, is nerines.
I was about to say belladonna lazy, the naked ladies.
Yeah, well,
similar.
Same idea, because they are autumn flowering bulbs, and they give you that just pop and joy and lovely colour when everything else is starting to die down. And
it's also often a contrasting colour to all the autumn colours.
Yes, that's true. I have this riot of colour, those pink nerines against all the autumn oranges.
Orange, that's right.
Yeah, actually it does look like a bit
very
of a
70s.
mess.
It's very 70s.
It's psychedelic, baby.
That's right. But I think the other thing to think about, because the brilliant bit about things like the annuals, they are low investment, and you can move them around, and you're not going to have them there the whole time as well. So they're fun to play with if you're someone who's interested in the garden, and they're the kind of things you can mix your garden up a bit. You don't have to be all purple one year. You can decide to then, I'm going to have a pink garden or a red garden, for the next year when my annuals come out too. So, they are something that gives you a bit of flexibility, which other plants don't necessarily, the evergreens that is, or the foliage plants that you might be putting in that structural stuff.
Yes, yeah. And let's talk about then a couple of, just to give some examples of multiple season givers.
Yeah,
Because
you had a better word for them before, multifunctional plants, something. I can't remember now.
Basically, what we're talking about is plants that give you a couple of different functions or performances.
Yeah, interest times.
In each of the inner seasons.
Yeah.
And one of my ones that I always kind of love, which I'm loving at the moment, is my Cercis canadensis, and that's a forest pansy. That's the cultivar that I have, and at the moment it's just got tight, hot pink blossoms that are that cluster on the branch structure.
That's
it's
right.
Very beautiful. And then coming into late spring, early summer, we'll get those beautiful burgundy heart-shaped leaves. Autumn, they turn green when everything else is turning red. And then winter, they all fall off, and then the branch structure of the Cercis is just
beautiful as well.
Beautiful.
That's right.
So to me, it's a giver.
It is.
It gives
multiple season giver.
It's a 4-season giver.
That's
what more could you want?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, and it gives shade too.
There you go. There you go. And I guess Some of the maples will do the same, and I'm going to get the name wrong, but the coral bark maple, I'm not even going to try and do the Latin name because I'm looking at fleur going,
Senkaki or Sangokaku. There's two different ones.
Right,
Yeah.
that's right. So it has that beautiful red bark in winter. Mine are coming out at the moment. They've got these beautiful little buds of lime green leaves. They will have beautiful lime green leaves, and then they'll give you a beautiful autumn display as well. So for me, that's a multi-season giver also.
Yeah, the Cornus alba, the western bird, that's another beautiful red stem dogwood.
Yes,
for winter. Also, I want to highlight one that's probably I've used it in designs, and it's just a great tree, and it's the Garrya elliptica. It's also known as the silk tassel bush. So it's a bit of a tree, but you could sort of train it as a bush. But it's evergreen, and in winter it has these long white catkins of flowers, and it's spectacular. That's a silk tassel thing happening, and that's a giver in winter when there's not that much else happening.
That's very true. That's very true. And I think we just need to throw some others in here as well. Some of the wattles can be amazing. So I'm trying to think of some natives now. The wattles, you get that spectacular spring display, and then some of them have amazing leaf forms that, persist throughout the year and that are potentially evergreen as well.
Oh, yeah. What about the Leptospermum morrisoni, the burgundy one?
Yes, which I actually don't like a whole lot.
Type of Leptospermum, type of tea tree.
I can appreciate that you might like it.
Oh, no. Well, what I was going to say is it not only does it give a contrast leaf form as an evergreen, but it also is a great screener.
Yes, of course.
So it's quite a tall screener. It's kind of tall and narrow, but
good hedgy thing.
Hedgy thing for a background plant. So you often need to put things in front of it because it's sort of tall and thin. But it's a great one to have like along a fence if you want that extra extender. So some people put fence extenders on. I think you just can put some Leptospermum there, and you can get a nice.
That's right.
Yeah,
and it has the benefit of being one of the few burgundy purple-leafed hedging plants as well.
Yes.
There aren't many of them.
That's true. Yeah. Actually, it's true. And it's a lovely leaf form.
That's right. Loropetalum is another one. It's not a native, obviously, but that's another, super hardy, but has interesting leaves and flowers, like the foliage, and then those flowers, and it's obviously a purple foliage all year round.
And in fact, they seem to flower two seasons.
Yes,
so
that's the other thing.
Spring and autumn, early autumn, early spring. And also, we're getting to this idea of multifunctional, so you can have them as a spectacular feature shrub, or you can have it. You can hedge them.
Yes, that's right. So you can actually change their shape to suit you. A bit like a Westringia, you can do the same thing there, because you can actually shape them. They can be, quite a wild-looking thing. You can use them in hedges, and you can also do a bit of clipping of them as well.
Actually, let me also give you two functions: so edible and hedging. So here,
I had a row of lettuces just come into my mind. I don't think that's what you quite had in.
That is not where I'm going. Not where I'm going, because come along, bunny, eat all your hedging.
That's right.
But where I was going there is because some people say, they want to hedge, but they like the fact that it's edible as well, bonus. So here I'm thinking of feijoa.
Oh, yes.
They make a great edible hedge.
They do.
And they're better when you've got a lot of them because they need each other to, they're not self-fertile.
Yes.
And bay trees.
Yes.
Hedge, and I mean, you really can't eat that many bay leaves in your life.
But if you need it for a stew, they're there. Yeah. But I just want to say...
And rosemary for topiary.
Of course.
Beautiful for clipping and edible.
And is very nice, can be very nice and dense. I was just going to say, for those people who don't know what a feijoa is, it is actually a fruit. You don't pick the leaves and eat them because you might be...
Pineapple guava.
Yes, that's the other name. Yes,
and
that's
I mean, I love it. It's a New Zealand native, I think.
It is a New Zealand native.
Yeah.
And it does have some very interesting red flowers too. So it's almost, a many season.
Yeah, and because it's quite a grey leaf, people use it in flower
arrangements.
Arrangements. Yeah,
that's
it's lovely.
Right. That's exactly right. I think we could spend a very long time doing lots of plants.
Right.
But I think so. There's some of the key ones. A couple that I want to shout out because they are Australian natives. Correas, lovely flower display, nice, neat shaped evergreen mounding clumps, I guess, or shrubs, and also Banksia. There's a range of Banksia types, and you can get some lovely prostrate ones, some that are lovely cascading, some that are high growing, the integrifolia, which is more like a tree, obviously. But I think, there's so many things, and they all have fabulous flowers and interest, and you need to be thinking about your garden in that how can you get the most value out of each and every plant that you put in there?
Yeah. So I think the key takeaway here for this episode is think design first. So think about this balance of what you want to achieve, what your trade-offs are prepared to be. Think design first, and then identify what's the impact and the structure and the intent of what you want to put in, and then identify plants last.
I think that's right.
Say, right, I want a shade tree that gives a deciduous effect here, then to pick the tree that's going to be the right one for that place.
That's right.
So plants come last, but think design first.
And thinking about, as Fleur said before, what is your proportion of, the plants that are the one-hit wonders versus those that are going to give you the multiple seasonal interest, and then your softscaping and your hardscaping proportions as well. So I think they're the key takeaways for today, Fleur.
And if you want to come and discuss some of these ideas in action, come to some of my garden tours in late October, early November, Gardens with Fleur, and we'll discuss these ideas in action.
Perfect.
Until next time.
Until next time. And don't forget to follow us on Spotify. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll talk to you soon.
See you next time.
See you.